Hello, everyone. Welcome to On the Move, a show where we share transportation, sales, and marketing success stories. I am Jennifer Kerpis Romaine, Executive Director at TMSA, which is a trade nonprofit educating and connecting marketing and sales professionals in transportation and logistics. And today on the show, I have Trey Griggs, founder and CEO of Beta Consulting Group. Welcome to the show, Trey.
Good to be here. I can't believe I actually made the cut. I get to be on the show of the TMSA podcast. It's exciting.
Yes, it is exciting. And I feel like we've both done shows together and you've interviewed me, but now we get to flip the script a little bit and I get to interview you, which is fun.
Let's go.
So today I really wanted to talk all about podcasts and how it can be built into a marketing strategy, and in large part because we're kicking off the fall trade show season, which I try to explain to people in not my logistics world, but in my real life, that there's really these two big seasons that we live in here in logistics and trade shows. It's like the spring and then the fall, and then we get little bits of breaks in winter and summer. But you love podcasts. Why do you like them so much?
Man, that's a great question. I mean, I think the easy answer is I do love to converse. I love to talk to people and to ask questions. I've always been interested in that. And so podcasting seemed pretty natural. I did newspaper as a kid. So interviewing people, asking questions was always something I did in high school and college. I was on the radio station in college. I broadcasted basketball and football games on the radio station. I had my own radio show, which I don't even know if I've told you about this or not, but on Saturday mornings, from 8 to 10, I had a radio show where I'd play music and talk a little bit, nothing big, just by myself. But I would always play the songs that the girls up in Ely Hall liked. And that was one of my tactics. And of course, one of those Ely Hall residents became my wife. So it worked out. But
well, that was a good move then.
It worked out. It was very strategic and it worked out well. But I've always enjoyed communicating, and I'm a teacher by trade, a consultant by trade, and asking questions and having people share their stories. I truly believe that everybody has a unique story that is meant to be shared. You know, everybody has a unique life experience, lessons they've learned, experience they've had. And I really believe that those stories are not meant just for us to be lived, but also for us to share and for people to benefit from that, to learn from that, to be entertained from that, whatever it might be. And so podcasting just kind of fills all of those things. It just makes a ton of sense for me and something I've enjoyed since I started doing it.
I like podcasts because I started my career in journalism. And so I also like to talk to people, hear their stories, do all that stuff. But I hate transcribing interviews. It was my least favorite part of all of journalism. And I'll still do it. I still write on the side when I have time. But for me, the podcasting part, like doing these, launching On the Move for TMSA, has been really fulfilling for me personally, because it allows me to do the things that I like best from the journalism piece, hearing the stories, all of that stuff, but then not having to do the part that I don't like, which is always preferred. So
yeah, I can see that.
I actually do remember that you did the radio station in college. And as you were saying, I'm like, oh, what a miss. I forgot when I was drafting my interview. So glad that you brought that up yourself. Over the course of your career then, how many podcasts have you hosted? Because I think you have two, three.
Well, I have two that I'm currently actively doing.
Yes. But at one point there was like 4 for Team Beta, I feel like.
Correct.
And then
Correct.
Yeah.
So it just kind of started to evolve. I mean, the first one was Word on the Street, which actually started during the pandemic on Friday afternoons. I just got guys together on a Zoom call, industry colleagues, whoever wanted to join. I just invited a bunch of people onto a Zoom call to have lunch and talk and kind of stay connected, because it was, you know, as an extrovert, that was one of the worst times in my career, is not being able to travel, not being able to really see people and talk to people. And so having this weekly lunch call just kind of started that whole thing. And it turned into this crew of reoccurring people that would show up, and these personalities started to develop. It was almost like a sitcom. And then we started recording it and putting it on YouTube. And then we started making it live and having audience interaction. It just kind of evolved over time. That was really fun. I started standing out when I started Beta Consulting Group as a way to kind of get our brand out there and to get some publicity and and have people come on the show. I wanted to have a show about sales, marketing, and leadership. I did it daily. I missed that. It was so much fun having a daily show. At some point, I may have to go back to that, because I just really enjoyed talking to people every day. It was a favorite part of my day, was knowing who I was going to get to talk to that day and have a conversation. We started a podcast called Iron Minds. My buddy Hayden Allred and I did back somewhere in 2022, maybe late 2022. And the whole idea was, hey, what if we had a show where we just worked out and we talked about life and business while we worked out and just encouraged people to work out? So we did that for a while, and it was fun. It was Mondays at 6 a.m. and that went on for a while. And then life kind of pulled us in slightly different directions. Just weren't really able to keep that going. I also started one called The Edge, which I would like to continue doing at some point, but it was about showcasing the latest in logistics technology. And the idea behind that is the big tech players, the ones that have money to go to trade shows and have a big exhibit booth or to purchase speaking space and those types of things, they're covered. But what about these small startups that have great ideas? They're just getting started. They don't have money yet. They're not VC backed. They're bootstrapping everything, and they don't have a lot of cash to spend. I wanted to give a voice to those technologies out there and really highlight what they're doing. Some weren't pure startups. Some had been going for a while, but they were just the smaller players. And anybody who was doing really great work in technology, I wanted to highlight that. So we started The Edge. So these all spurred out of just ideas. And I'm not one to sit back and wait. I usually just try things and see how they go. And I really enjoy doing them all. But at some point, it's hard to keep them going. Maybe if we don't have sponsors, it's just extra work. It's a lot to do. And so we set some of those aside temporarily while we work on some of the aspects of our business.
And is there a perfect recipe for podcasts to be successful? Like what ingredients need to be put up in it to have a chef's kiss?
That's a great question. I wasn't quite ready for that one. I think
I
the
sent the
first thing that
questions ahead of
I
time.
know, but listen, you know that I read them. I didn't think through answers yet. I like to think off the top of my head. The first thing that comes to mind is authenticity. I think for any show to be successful, the host has to be authentic to who they are and to what they care about, and just be themselves. Because if you look at our industry in particular, the podcasts that have done well are people just being authentically them. I mean, most people don't know this about Blythe Brumleve, but she's just kind of a nerd, which is cool. Like she loves supply chain, she loves NASA, and she's just being true to that. And people love that. They eat that up. She's doing great. Chris Jolly is a freight broker, and he kind of looks and acts and talks kind of what you would expect a freight broker to look and act and talk like. And he doesn't apologize to anybody, and that's who he is. He's very authentic. I think when you see some of the podcasts that have done really, really well in our space, a lot of times it just has to be because of the authenticity. Nate Schutz, he's passionate about founders and especially logistics and just and doing that. And so whoever's hosting it, whoever's doing it, I think it just has to be authentic to who they are and their vision, their ideas, and not try to be like anybody else. There's always a market for you. I like to say that to everybody. There's a market for you, who you are, whatever that is. You might think that you're the weirdest person in the world, but there's a market for that. You might think that you're the most knowledgeable about 90s music. There's a market for that. Whatever it is that you are passionate, excited about, and authentically you, there's a market for that. So that's the first thing, is to be authentic. I think the second thing is to, in my opinion, try to make it as conversational as possible, because people enjoy listening to people be real and authentic. And if it's too scripted, not saying you can't have predetermined questions. I'm not saying that at all, because I have some questions that I use as well, just to help get things going. But I would say don't be so strict on what you've decided ahead of time, because some really good stuff can come off the cuff if you're listening, if you're ready for it, and if you're willing to chase some of those rabbit trails of people's stories and their conversations. So try to make it as conversational as possible. I think that's really important. And then from a length perspective, man, it's a tough question, because you have like Joe Rogan, who's 3 hours and people love it. They eat that up. You have, some people that will go for an hour and people just can't get enough of it. And then other people, it's like, this is way too long, or they do 15 minutes and it's perfect. I think it's really what you feel is comfortable. Let me give you an example. We're on the streets an hour because it's 8 of us on there yelling at each other all for an hour, and it's
100%.
chaos and it's busy. That would feel weird if it was only half an hour, in my opinion. Standing out, those generally run 30 to 40 minutes because they're one-on-one interviews, and that's kind of the length of it. Some of them could go a little longer. Some of them kind of feel like you're pulling teeth as a host to get people to talk. So that's kind of what we've stuck with on that. I think the length is really kind of whatever the content allows it to be. If it's really interesting content, especially if it's telling a bigger story, like a lot of times Joe Rogan has guests on and they talk about like, different situations in life or circumstances or more long form content. It's perfect. So I think you just have to be authentic to the content that you're putting out there and what feels right in that regards. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's what I think of.
It does. I think it varies too. And being on this side, I've learned my own method. So one, as a journalist, I come prepared with questions because that's how I prepare as the interviewer. But I always warn guests, okay, but like if you say something really insightful, I'm going to follow up and ask a question that I wouldn't have been
Yeah.
able to predetermine. Like be prepared for that. But I also find, especially like the sales side people, they're ready to talk 100% out the gate. They are quick on their feet. A lot of marketing people are, but there's also a lot of marketing people whose job is to put their CEO or to put their boss in the seat to be the person interviewed. So they're not as used to being in front of the camera or being the person interviewed. So I find sometimes doing the predetermined questions can help them so they are come prepared for how they want to answer. They feel more comfortable. I do think conversation is best. There has to be like a ratio between being fun and being like you feel like you're part of the conversation listening to them, but also providing value. Because if you're not learning anything, then people are going to lose interest. And I agree in terms of the cadence, like the length of the show, it really what does the whatever it determines. Like that's what my when I do write journalistically, I'll be like, what's the word count you want? And my editor sometimes will be like, okay, this is the space we have, so make it work. But like for the most part, it's like, what is the story warrant? Because you don't want to cut
Right.
it off
Yeah.
too soon. You don't want to ramble on. What does the story, what is that need? And then that's how you base it, which can be really hard to determine sometimes. But
Yeah,
or a lot of
absolutely.
times they'll be like, here's this monster piece. You tell me what you need to cut out. These are my I one time I did that. I was like, this is my suggestion of what to cut out, but I also think it's really relevant. So depending on how much space you actually have, like feel free.
Yeah.
But I think those things are important. The only other thing I would add is consistency. Like yeah, I think you can like I like when people know that they're going to take a break and they do like seasons. Like, okay, this is season 1, I'll take the summer off, season 2, whatever. But I do think whatever cadence it is, trying to get in a rhythm of that, but figuring out what that looks like. The other thing I wanted to ask is the big question between pre-recorded podcasts and live podcasts. Is there, I mean, obviously there's a difference, but in terms of like a success model, if somebody is thinking about starting a podcast, do you have a recommendation?
That's a good question. Yeah, there's obviously benefits to both of them. Before I answer that, I will say this also: if you want to keep the conversation going really fast too, sometimes it's good to have segments in your show. So breaking some things up, maybe breaking it up with a fun fact, breaking it up with a fun segment or something like that, just to break it up. Most of the guests on my show are like, I can't believe that was 30 minutes, or I can't believe it was 45 minutes. Where did that go? So breaking it
Mhm.
up also kind of makes it a little bit easier from a flow and those types of things, especially when the conversation maybe is more difficult to have. As far as live versus recorded, so standing out. So most of the things I did were all live because I love live. I'm a
Mhm.
huge fan of live. I think it's more authentic. Whatever you say is what's out there. There's no way to take it back, and I like that. Like I think that's authentic. Some people are afraid of that. So if you're afraid of that, you may not want to do live. That's number one. But I also like the audience engagement. When you have a live show, you have the opportunity to have an audience engage with you while you're on the show. And I think that adds an extra kind of layer of engagement and excitement and questions maybe that I'm not thinking of, that other people might be thinking of. So it kind of creates that group community involvement, I think on a higher level. So I love live for those things. I love the fact that it's very authentic and transparent and it's engaging with an audience in real time. It also saves on production because if you do it live, all the production happens during the show. You have to prepare a little bit more in advance. You might want to prepare intro videos or graphics you want to put up or whatever it might be, songs, those types of things. But if you get that done, there's really very little production on the back end. It's easy to cut those into clips and put them on social, but there's not a lot of editing. Or what I
Mhm.
found too is some people get paralysis kind of by editing. Like if you record it and you start down the editing path, you might be too inclined to make it perfect. So you're editing way too much. It's taking too long, and it might never get out there. Most podcasts don't make it past 10 podcasts. And I think that's part of the reason why is that people put too much emphasis on the editing and trying to make it perfect instead of just getting it out there. So if you are going to do recorded, just don't get caught up and bogged down in the editing process. In fact, the things that we do now in Standing Out, which is a recorded podcast, we don't do it live anymore right now. We don't change it, even though it's recorded. We put up what's recorded. We don't
Mhm.
we don't fix it. And so in that sense, it's kind of live. But I think some people get too bogged down in the editing process when it's recorded. And I'd say be careful not to do that, because that'll eat up your time. And it also tries to make it perfect, and then you have to keep making it perfect. And I just don't think that's the road you want to go. Recorded's nice though, because it does give you flexibility on when you're going to record. So when we did Standing Out, it was live at 10:30 a.m. every day Central Time. So all my guests had to be available at 10:30 a.m. Central every day, or we didn't have a show. So it definitely restricted what we were able to do. Now when we record, the guests can pick the time that works best for them. We record it. We have plenty of time to promote it ahead of time too. That's the other thing. When you record it, you can promote it ahead of time. When you are going live, you can only promote that it will be a show. You can't promote any of the content. But when you record it, you can promote some of the content ahead of time, and teasers, and get people interested, which is what most media does. I mean, most interviews are recorded on, news stations or whatever, and they'll tease a little bit of the interview, and that's very common practice. So I wouldn't say that there's necessarily like an advantage one way or the other, or one's better than the other. I think it really depends on what you're going for, what you're comfortable with, and how you want to operate. If you want your guests to have some flexibility in terms of scheduling, or if you just want to make it, live and they join you type of a thing. All those things need to be considered. I like both, but I really love live. Like live is my favorite. If I could do everything live, I would.
I agree to your points. The only thing I would add is, which was something I had to gut check myself before launching On the Move. So prior to doing the weekly podcast for TMSA, every LinkedIn Live we did was live. And it was really like, I liked having the audience be able to ask questions, all the things that you said. And the first couple episodes of On the Move were live, because I was like, this is a live show. We're going to do this. And then I was like, we have a 2-person headquarter team. The show is one small piece of everything that TMSA does and provides for our members and to the industry at large. We can't actually commit to doing a live show once a week for all of those reasons that you listed. Like the audience, then you're the people you're interviewing has to be ready. Then I also have to be available at the same time every week, which is nearly impossible. And so we did the first couple, we already had the lined up. So I'm like, the people are ready to go, we'll do it. But from then on, we've done it recorded. But then one tip I actually got from Blythe that I try to do is actually then go on LinkedIn or YouTube or both places, wherever people are engaging, and watch the show with your people, because then you can still have some of that engagement, but just through like the messages on the side. So I've tried to do that too, which is really fun, because that way, if people are coming up with questions, I can still follow up with them. I can still engage with them, but the recording is already there. And we, from a editing standpoint, we do the same thing that you said for Standing Out. We don't edit it. There's been 2 that we've had to edit, and that's just because I had internet issues, and in the middle, it just completely stopped. And so we then edited out the dead air of the super nice guests who just waited for me to reappear. We didn't make their awkwardness of staring, like wondering what was going to happen. But besides that, we go through. And I think that's really important too, because I do think that if we're thinking about why can't people continue to do consistent podcasts, that resourcing time is really important to factor in.
Yeah.
And so Tiffany is our producer for the show. If I was like on top of everything else you do as the administrator of TMSA, you now have to edit the podcast, everything that comes out, every stupid thing that I say. I don't watch. I mean, I watch them back, but I try to just focus on whoever I'm interviewing and not myself. But it would be too much. That would be too much work to, offset everything else that she's doing. So I think things like that are really important. Like, what is the purpose of the podcast? Are you able to achieve that if it's recorded? That's pretty much what the purpose of this podcast to me is, to talk to TMSA members, people in the industry, tell their successful stories, have their input and feedback. Can I achieve those things with a recorded podcast? Sure can. So I can do that. If it's about fielding all of these questions and like having live participation, you can't do that with a recorded podcast. So thinking about
right. Yeah. It's interesting. You think to think back to when I had the Daily Show, I remember it was definitely challenging because I had to plan all of my travel around that. I remember one time landing in Phoenix, Arizona, and the flight was just a little bit delayed, just a little bit. So I get my rental car and I'm trying to get to my location in time to set up. And I realized I'm not going to be able to get there in time to set up. And so I literally went to a local park. I grabbed my computer and my microphone and everything, and I hotspotted to my phone and I logged in and I did it right there in the park. And that happened multiple times where I had to
Mhm.
just, wherever I was, I had to stop and do the show. I did shows at professional golf tournaments. I did shows like I had to think through my travel in a way that was just really nuts and probably unsustainable.
Mhm.
But it did work. We did make it work, but it was pretty wild. So you don't realize the commitment that you're making if it's
Mhm.
daily or weekly or 3 times a week, that you can't travel on those days. You can't. There's certain things that you can no longer do, and I even feel that now with Word on the Street. I mean, it's Fridays at noon, so unless I get a guest host, I can't miss. And so, like, we wanted to leave early on a vacation. Like, it's a little bit harder. Got to figure that out. If I wanted just to take a Friday off or go play golf, I have to do it afterwards. So there's definitely some restrictions to live. So it's something to think about for sure.
Mhm. So I kind of want to flip things on the other side. So we've covered a lot of like if you're starting a podcast, thinking about hosting, things to consider. But I really want to talk about too appearing on podcasts as part of a marketing strategy and marketing plan, highlighting different things, especially when we're talking about trade shows. How does podcasting fit into that puzzle of an overall like PR marketing strategy?
Well, I think it's huge. I think a lot of companies don't take advantage of that, and most podcasters are looking for great guests. And so, if you're, marketing coordinator, VP marketing, whoever, whatever your role is, and you're wanting to get the brand out there, especially your leadership. I mean, if you've got great leaders or a great owner, somebody with a great story, somebody that just needs some visibility, I would highly recommend it, because not only is it a great way to provide some visibility to your leadership and to your company, but most podcasters will either give you the content or sell you the content. And even that is a deal, because it's content that you didn't have to make yourself. It's done. It's ready to go. And so like, we give all of our content away. We have sponsors for our show, and that's how we monetize, because I don't want my guests to ever pay to be on the show or pay for what we're doing afterwards. I just want to give them the content and let them run with it. So that's a gift that we give out there. Some of them charge for it. It's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We just choose not to do that. But it creates content that you can repurpose, whether it's in a newsletter or in social media or in an email campaign you might send out or on your website or a YouTube channel or whatever. It creates a lot of content so people can get to know you, get to know your company, and actually hear from you. There's a level of trust that goes up when somebody watches a leader at a company talk. I mean, I saw this with like Michael Caney at Highway. Highway started to do really great things early on. They had Jordan Graff, their CEO, is well respected in the industry. But then like Michael Caney and Jordan started going on these podcasts and speaking everywhere, and their level of like market and brand equity and market awareness of who they were went through the roof, because people not only started, kept hearing about Highway, but they also got to feel like they got to meet the leaders. Now, they didn't get to meet Jordan and Michael, they got to watch them, but there was this familiarity. It's almost like I kind of use the Gary V syndrome to make this point. And that is, I've watched enough Gary Vaynerchuk, that I know what he cares about. And I feel like I know him, even though I've never met him. I feel like I know him, and I feel like I trust him. So much so that if I ever got a phone call and it said on my phone, VaynerMedia, I would answer that call, because there's a level of familiarity and trust that he's built just by being out and talking. So by going on podcasts, it's essentially what you're doing is you're allowing people into your world a little bit to become more familiar with who you are, what you care about. Oh, that guy likes football. I like football. Oh, that's cool. Just whatever it is, like, whatever it might be. I know it's sports analogy.
No
You love it,
sports.
but there's something that's common about that. There's something familiar. For Gary Vee, it's like the guy that's really into wine. You might go, man, I love wine too. Like, there's a
Mhm.
connection point that can be made there, and you feel like you know them, which gives a level of trust. And it's an avenue of marketing that is now afforded to us. That was very difficult before. If you wanted to get in front of somebody before, you had to pay for a TV commercial to get in front of people, or something in the newspaper or something on the radio, to try to let people into your world to get to know who you are. And now anybody can do that. And most podcasters are looking for great guests. It's a great strategy to reach out to all the podcasters and say, hey, would you have my CEO on? She's, done this and that and whatever. So I just think it's a strategy that a lot of companies are failing to do, putting their people on podcasts and potentially even starting their own podcast where they can create the content.
Mhm. Oop, you somehow popped out of the show. It
Hey,
was
we
a
switched sides. Now I'm on
mic
this side.
drop moment. He's done. Goodbye. Um,
That's right.
so I agree. I think that when we're little kids, we learn about how everyone learns different ways. Some people are hands-on learners, some people want to read it, some people need to hear it. And so I think that fundamentally building a marketing strategy or a PR strategy, we should remember those things. that people are learning and absorbing informations in different ways. So absolutely have partnerships with trade media that you have your advertisements out. Absolutely, create your own content, your own blogs, your own white papers, things like that for people that want to read. But also, people, like you said, they want to listen. People are absorbing information listening to podcasts that might not be reading or want to read a white paper. So I think it fills a need to how people are getting information and where they're getting information from in the industry. And it does let you talk a little bit more and engage in a different way than other platforms that you would have. And
Yeah.
that speaks to like that
And
authenticity,
I'll tell you something.
authenticity piece you mentioned at the beginning.
And here's something really fascinating. So we also see these different mediums play out, like politically, for example. And this is really fascinating to me because, when Obama ran in '08 and 2012, he totally took social media by storm from a political standpoint. He utilized it in a way that nobody had utilized social media before. It's still pretty new. I mean, I think of '08, Facebook started, what, '04? I mean, it was still very, very new at that point, '03. But he was able to use that to his advantage from that perspective. It's interesting because now you're seeing Donald Trump go on all these podcasts. Like these podcasters are having him on their show. You have Joe Rogan, his podcast, and what that's doing politically. You have, it's interesting to see the politicians that are going on podcasts and the ones that are not. It's interesting because I feel like it's almost a reversal in a way to what happened in '08. In '08, you had Obama running against McCain, and it couldn't have been a bigger contrast from a social media perspective. It could not have been bigger. Like Obama totally utilized social media. McCain may not have known much of, like, I hate to say it, he might not have known what was going on with social media at that time. And so it became an advantage. So it's interesting to also see politicians using this to get the authentic candidate out there, like to get this interview to try to make him look authentic and real, because podcasts are rarely edited. A lot of times just long form content, just having conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting to see that happening politically. But I think from a business standpoint, the same thing can happen for your company. And that is you get your CEO on, your sales leader on, somebody on there, and it gives this kind of familiarity and this kind of trust factor goes up. So
Mm-hmm. And I think when we're talking about the trade show time, it's a way to help engage even more. So whether your CEO is speaking at an event or you're launching a new product, you're at a booth, whatever that is, you are then talking about pretty much what you're going to be doing at those shows on the show ahead of time. So then you're getting people excited about what you're doing. It's sometimes I have my entire plan of what I plan, who I plan to talk to, what I plan to see for a trade show before I even walk in the door. Or at least I try to, honestly, with a little bit of wiggle room. So, and how I do that is looking at, I saw that person is speaking from their social media, or I listened to that podcast and that sounds like a really interesting topic that I want to make sure I listen to. So it's a way to be able to talk about what you're doing and why you want to do it before you get to the show, which is not something that you get to see everywhere, especially as an event planner. People have me, like, I've been on Standing Out and I've talked about Elevate, and I get to do that all the time, which I love. I'm the face of TMSA. That's great. But if you are just a speaker at a show, what other way are you engaging? Putting on social media is always really good. But going on podcasts, also a great idea, because not only does that give you more exposure at the show that you're going to, then you can also be seen as a thought leader for whatever that topic is, which I'm guessing is why you're speaking on that topic at that show anyway, because you want to be seen as a thought leader and maybe be able to be engaged in those conversations in a different way. So reaching out to different podcasters, maybe that they're going to the show. I know you've done like live podcasts at the trade shows as well. You actually, in 2022 conference at TMSA, you started live on stage and then walked off. Speaking back to that, you had to perfectly time what you were doing, because I was like, excuse me, you are emceeing the show. You're supposed to do things. But you had to go podcast. So I feel like those are all really important ways that I don't think people think about when they think about podcasts. How can you engage? How can you put that as part of your media plan and pushing different things out?
Yeah, and I do think that that was fun. By the way, I did enjoy that. Got to interview Holly Laboda walking around the conference center in Orlando, I believe it was at that time.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that there's just a miss in terms of companies who. I mean, I think of podcasting; it can do wonders for lead generation. Think about this: if you had a podcast for your company and you had some people that you're really just trying to get in with or trying to connect with, you can reach out to them and say, "Hey, would you come on our show? Tell us your story. We'd love to hear about it. You're doing great things. We've watched from afar for a while. We'd love to share that story with our audience." They come on the show, they share their story. It's great content, but it gives you a chance to meet each other.
Mhm.
So now they're getting to know you. You're getting to know them a little bit. It might lead to business opportunities moving forward. And so there's a lead gen component of it as well that is very possible. And a lot of companies are not necessarily utilizing that so much. I mean, every guest on my show, and I don't invite them on for this. I want to invite guests on that have a good story that are going to share what they've learned, and it's going to be beneficial for our guests. But everybody that comes on my show is potentially somebody I could do business with on some level. Maybe they're a
Mhm.
referral partner. Maybe there's somebody that could utilize our consulting services and our strategy and our creativity for what they're doing. Maybe we can connect them with one of our referral partners and help them out in that way. There's always opportunities that come out of these that if you don't do them, you just kind of miss that opportunity. So I think there's a lot of positives that companies don't realize and don't benefit from because they either don't start their own podcast, they don't go on podcasts, or just not utilizing that arm. It was interesting though. I feel like in 2023, late 2023 and early 2024, we started to see companies having their own shows. 3PL has 3PL Systems has 3PL Live. Cargo Chief has Get Freight to It. You have some of these companies that have started. I think Banyan started one. I can't think of the name of it right off the top. Something about tires.
Mhm.
You've got these companies that are starting them, which I think is great. Hopefully they'll keep them going, but there's definitely a purpose for it and a benefit if you do it right.
Yes, and I think if you are a company thinking about launching a show, I think it's really important to have a purpose in what you're talking about and how you're talking about it. And I wouldn't be remiss to think about launching a podcast specifically geared towards your drivers. If you have that type, like if you have a lot of drivers on the road, they can listen more than they can read something while they're traveling. So if you want to reach them, get really important information to them, maybe entertain as you're educating, all of that kind of stuff can be really impactful. But then also, yes, if you want to be seen as a thought leader or potential partner, then you can have a more public podcast as well.
Yep, absolutely. Now I have to go off track just a minute because this logo is right by my head and it's been by my head since we switched sides. And
Mhm.
I feel like I just want to like hold it up,
You
maybe
can.
do
There it
something.
is
I don't know,
on the
something like
move.
that. Just
High,
hold it
are
up.
you trying to high
Put my
five it?
hand behind it. Oh, right there. Look, now it's on my hand. I don't know. Just see, this is the distracted side of me. It
Mhm.
happens from time to time,
That's
but
why we had you on this side to
I'm
start.
right there. I'm right next to it. I just feel like I had to.
I like when it's on like an all white wall because then it looks like the people have the logo behind them, which is really fun.
Oh, you know what I could do? Because this is a black on black hat. I could do. Ooh,
Oh
look at
yeah,
this.
there you go. There you go.
Let me move it. There we go. Look at that. It looks like it's on the hat. Just take a quick picture, everybody. Your logo on a hat. Okay. All right.
Perfection. I do you if somebody is starting a podcast, how do you name? I was just thinking because you said so much about our logo. We really sat in that decision at TMSA for a really long time. Over the past couple years, we've rebranded or named a lot of our pieces. And how do they all fit together? And everything here is about elevating, like our Elevate conference or moving forward, which is our newsletter,
Mm-hmm.
like pushing things forward, momentum, things like that. And so when we were thinking about what the podcast could be on the move came to mind and I just really really liked it, and then it was like a name that was like in my head, in my head, in my head. And then as I was going through, it's TMSA's 100-year anniversary this year, and I was going through a bunch of things from the past. And it's actually the newsletter, the name of the newsletter when TMSA was TMCA, the Transportation Marketing and Communications Association. The name of that newsletter was On the Move. And I was like, it's
That
Kismet, love it. That's what the name's going to be.
it's meant
Um,
to be.
but I feel like it has to be something like catchy and small, but maybe not used. And then, of course, it at least not used in logistics. Like there's always going to be a podcast with your name, probably
Yeah.
somewhere out
Yeah,
there.
there are more than one standing outs in the world.
Yeah,
I have
it's
found.
just
That's true.
like people
Yep.
are like, oh, there's other Elevate conferences. I'm like, I'm sure there are,
Yeah. Yeah,
but there are
exactly.
none right here with us.
Right. 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 Well, I'll say this. My best advice for, that type of like creative element is to get some outside help that can listen to all your ideas. Like you can do a brain dump, but it's great to have somebody on the outside who's creative, who's not in the middle, because a lot of times when you're just too close to it, it's hard to be creative. It's hard to see it for what it is. But if you're able just to do a brain dump and just talk about all the things that matter to you, talk about what you're thinking about, why you want to have this podcast, who are some of the guests you're thinking about having on, who's the audience, what it's about. When you're able to do the brain dump to somebody who's creative, a lot of times they'll find something that's really kind of clever, unique, or interesting that works. So especially if you're not a creative person, I'd say bring in some outside help for this. This is something we do with a lot of our clients because I just feel like you're too close sometimes. The whole saying, can't see the forest for the trees. It's real. When you are trying to message yourself, sometimes it's really, really difficult to do that because you know too much about your business. You know too many things in your mind. So trying to simplify that into a cohesive message that tells people exactly what you do can be very, very difficult. I think this falls in line with that, where you want to come up with something really clever and fun and unique. Maybe this just isn't your thing from a creative perspective, or maybe you just have too many things in your head. Bringing in somebody short term for an hour, 2 hours, and just sit and talk and just get all this stuff out. A lot of times they're going to come up with some options that are really good. And I think you'd also should consider utilizing AI, because AI allows you to be creative without necessarily being creative. So you could say, hey, give me 10 creative, interesting, never heard of names for a podcast about X,
Mhm.
and see what it comes up with. And that might spur also some creativity. Maybe you don't use exactly what is generated, but maybe it spurs something that leads to what you end up using. So I think the use of AI and the use of outside resources can be incredibly helpful in terms of coming up with name, branding, those types of things. Obviously, you had something already in your head, but a lot of people don't think like that necessarily, or aren't as creative in doing that. And there's other ways to get some help.
Mhm. Yes, I think that's good advice. And I want to just circle back to thinking about in engaging and coming on podcasts. Um, Something that you said I think is really important. You're like, podcasters are looking for good guests, which I 100% agree with. So I think if you are like you said, a marketing manager, you have somebody with a story to tell, or somebody that's going to be speaking at a conference or just attending a conference, or especially right now when the market is tough and people are really picking which conferences they're going to, like explaining why that person is going to that conference, what they're going to do, it will give you more ROI, hopefully give you more connections or contacts, because say other people that are listening to that podcast are also going to that show, they will then want to potentially connect with that person when they're there. I think all things are like that are really important. And as a host, I can definitely say I love when people are like, hey, I want to be on the show and this is what I would love to talk about. It really helps shape what that looks like. And I really work to see, okay, when are we doing a sales story or marketing story or however that fits. And so having somebody with a really great idea or something that they want to talk about, a new product, a new service, something like that, that's always really helpful.
Yeah, and if you do just a little bit of research in regards to what the podcast is about, you can frame your guest to fit that show. So, for example, standing out's about sales, marketing, and leadership. That's all we focus on. If somebody want to come on and talk about how to build a product, it might not be a great fit. But if you want to talk about the leadership of building a team that's going to build a great product, I'd love to talk about that. So it's like if you do a little research on what the show is all about, then it's real easy to tailor your guest to the show. I get requests on the show quite often, and the ones that stand out to me are the ones that say, hey, I watched this episode, I know that you like to talk about sales, marketing, and leadership. I'd love for my chief revenue officer to come on who has some really cool ideas on marketing that he's implemented here and talk about those. That's like gold. That's so
Mhm.
good. But somebody that is just more wanting to have somebody on, doesn't really know what my show's about. It's harder to, it feels like fishing. So I
Mhm.
just say do a little bit of research about the show and then tailor your pitch with your potential guest to that show, and that makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely. For anyone that is watching this, if you're interested in being on the move, you
Ooh,
can scan
QR
this
code
QR
right
code
there.
and be a guest. If you're interested in being
I'm
on
gonna scan it so
Tradeshow,
I can be a guest again. That's what I'm
oh,
gonna
perfect.
do.
Um, if you want to be on any of Trey shows, you can. How do you want people to contact you?
Just willing to reach out to me on LinkedIn through DM, or send an email to us. It's to me, Trey at betaconsultinggroup.com. It's the easy way to do that. You can also find us on our website, betaconsultinggroup.com. There's a little button there. Schedule a call with me to talk podcasting or talk about sales and marketing strategies, whatever it might be.
And we've talked a lot about industry shows coming up this fall and how people can
Mm-hmm.
maximize their exposure and ROI through podcasting. But I'd be remiss to not talk about that TMSA does have an event coming up October 10th through 11th in Hoboken, New Jersey. It's our executive summit, and we've been working really, really hard on putting this event out. There's going to be such a great lineup. We have conversations around sustainability. We'll be talking about TMSA has a benchmarking study that we do every other year, and we'll be taking a deep dive into what that data actually shows and how people can prepare. We have a marketing workshop, a sales workshop, all kinds of stuff. So we hope to see you there. And you can now talk about Broker Carrier Summit.
Well,
Because
first of all,
you
I love
also
these QR codes. I love the QR codes that are popping up here on Restream. That's impressive. I have not seen that yet. So
have,
kudos to Restream on that. By the way, Restream and StreamYard are the two best tools, in my opinion, from a podcasting standpoint, especially if you're going to do video. So just throw that out there. Yeah, I've always heard so many good things about Executive Summit. I haven't made it to that yet, mainly because I'm limiting my travel. I got a 16-year-old and 14-year-old. I'm trying not to go anywhere and as much as possible, but I am going to be at Broker Carrier Summit because that's one that we put on. That's going to be in Fort Worth, October 23 through 25. And if you're a freight broker or a truckload carrier, you've got to make it, especially carriers. Carriers don't understand how valuable this is. Think about this. Carriers are looking for loads on load boards, and they oftentimes end up working with some of the freight brokers that don't treat them well. They're more the big box brokers, have the loads, and they often don't get the best rates. They don't get the best communication. It's very frustrating. By coming to the Broker Carrier Summit, they can meet like-minded brokers who can help them out. We had so many brokers in Kansas City who were giving loads to carriers like that week. Like we had carriers that said, I got 4 loads yesterday from the guy that I met at lunch, and we're moving those for him now. And so it's finding like-minded partners. It's great. So we definitely want to get the carriers there. So that's brokercarriersummit.com, brokercarriersummit.com. You can use coupon code BETA, and you get 10% off on your registration. We'd love to see you there, and that's going to be a lot of fun. And then we have to mention this. I'll be at Women in Trucking, and I'm really excited about that.
Same.
Going to be, yay, we were there last year together. I love Women in Trucking because, one, I love the mission of their organization. I love them bringing women together who are really the pioneers and trailblazers. And I love being there because it's my way, one of the ways that I get to say thank you in person to these amazing people who are, blazing the trails for my kids. I don't know if my kids are going to end up in transportation or not, but they're making it possible. And I love that. So I'm excited to be there. We're also doing a live episode of Standing Out on the main stage. How cool is that? So an hour-long episode.
Pretty cool. I'm speaking, but just nothing to do with the podcast in that moment.
You will not be on that show, probably.
But I always love Women in Trucking, going there and engaging with the fellow ladies. And
Dallas, November 11th through 14th.
Mm-hmm. So awesome. We will put all those links in the show notes if you guys are interested in any of these shows or hanging out with us more. But to wrap up the show, I'm going to ask you my favorite question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. And that is, if you could go back in time and advise a younger Trey anything, whether it's personally or professionally, when would you go back to and what would you say?
I'd probably go back to my 22-year-old self, just getting out of college. And I would encourage that young man to do 2 things. 1, find a mentor who's going to help me learn about business, because I just didn't know anything about business. And I would have liked to have learned at least some business principles. Even though I was going into teaching, I just think like learning about finance, learning about business in general would have been a good skill, because when I was a teacher, the reason I got out of teaching is because I couldn't figure out how to make more money. I felt stuck. And little I know that there are teachers out there that have side hustles, and they do decent on those side hustles, and it allows them to keep teaching. And I'd probably still be a teacher today if that were the case. So I would have loved to have had a mentor that taught me about business. And I would have also really would have loved to have somebody who would have taught me about real estate and how to invest in that early on. Those are 2 things that I've had to learn later in life. And I wish that I'd learned those earlier on, because stuff was a lot less expensive back then, 20 some years ago. And it would be nice to have a portfolio of rental properties or just properties in general that we're using for whatever purpose. And that would have been good. So 22, business and real estate, advisor, guide, somebody like that, mentor. That'd been great.
That is, I will. When more recently went to like a financial planner, and he said it is very rare for young people to come, but it's the most we can do is for younger people. And I was like, good
Yeah.
to know. You
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
market to those people.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I think that younger people are harder to market to because they feel like they've got time or they feel like it's not important or whatever. And then you start to realize in your 40s the power of compounding interest and go, dang it, that was stupid. I should have done that. And so I just feel like I'm a little late to the party in a lot of ways. I'm a late entrepreneur, started my first company at, I think I was 38, 39, and it was okay. And then started this one at 40, whatever, 43. So I just feel like I'm kind of late to the party in some of these things. I would have liked to have had a mentor. And part of it's because, my dad and I didn't have a great relationship. And then he passed away when I was 27. Just didn't have that person in my life to kind of guide me in those directions. My mom didn't know a lot about business, so she wasn't really in that realm to teach me about that, and just didn't have anybody else. So that would have been really nice to have that. Not complaining. We're here for a reason. Life is good.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show today and
Thanks for
talking all
having
about
me.
podcasting. And thank you for your time and for everyone who's